All right, everybody, time for our notes on deep sea ecosystems. So the deep sea ecosystem is actually the largest ecosystem in the ocean. Most of the deep seas is covered by the abyssal zone, which is that bottom flat area of the earth between usually about 3,000 to 4,000 meters. In that deep area, a couple of characteristics of the abyssal zone or the deep sea is the temperature. Temperature stays a constant 2 degrees Celsius, so that's just a little above 0 degrees Celsius, the freezing point. There's no sunlight at all. So because there's no sunlight, there's no photosynthesis and very little primary productivity. There are a few things that do chemosynthesis for primary productivity, but no photosynthesis. For a long time, people thought that it was impossible for anything to even be living at the bottom of the deep sea because of that lack of photosynthesis and light. But instead, there is quite a diversity of life. Here we have some of our actual predators down there. We have the chimera, the ratfish, the saber-toothed viperfish, and a six-gilled shark. When it comes to the deep sea, most of the nutrients in the deep sea come from marine snow. Again, we don't have that primary productivity, no plants down there. Marine snow we've talked about before. It's been a while. This comes from the decaying dead organisms that fall to the bottom. Other sources of nutrients come from, say, fecal pellets, particularly those actually of seabirds and all the nitrogen. And then also things like the bodies of dead whales provide important nutrient sources. Because of the lack of nutrients, the cold temperature, high pressure, and lack of sunlight, there are several adaptations that are unique to deep sea organisms. One is their color. For the most part, fishes, we tend to see either a gray or a black. Invertebrates tend to be shades of red. Invertebrates are going to be those prey items. And in fish, most of the bioluminescence produces blue light, so this red coloration actually helps them hide from their predators. Others then are often just colorless. They just lack pigment altogether. So here are some examples of our fish: a fangtooth or a hatchet fish, and then one of those bright red invertebrates. This is a shrimp. Here are some of our other fishes. Things like comb jellies turn bright red. Here's a squid that's just totally transparent, no need for pigment. Our next adaptation is going to be the eyes. Depending on where that animal is found, if it's a little bit higher in what's called the twilight zone, where there's a little bit of light, their eyes might be super big to be able to collect the maximum amount. However, below 2,000 deeps in the true abyssal zone, where there is zero light outside of the occasional bursts of bioluminescence, eyes will be either super small or lost. There's no need for them to have eyes. We also see this phenomenon happening in cave-dwelling organisms where it's complete darkness. If it's totally dark, you don't need eyes to be able to collect light to see. There's no light around. So here we have some fish with really large eyes. This squid swims on its side, so its eyes are different sizes. There's one that's really big and one that's really small. And then here we have the gulper eel, which has very reduced eyesight. Next adaptation is going to be for feeding. We look back at these gulper eels, really giant mouths. And that's because if you're a predator living in the dark, you don't know what you're going to find to eat. And so whatever you find needs to be able to fit into your mouth and stay there. So these tend to have very long needle-like teeth that act almost like a net or a cage to trap food. And a hinged jaw. Here we go. Our hinged jaw here, this fish can actually open up its mouth wider than its prey in order to make sure that things get swallowed. There's also things like this anglerfish that'll have a bioluminescent light, think in Finding Nemo, that will attract prey to it for it to be able to eat. Next adaptation's mating. Not only is finding food difficult, finding a mate for reproduction is difficult. And in order for a species to be successful, they have to be able to reproduce. One solution to this has been found by the anglerfish. In the case of the anglerfish, really weird. So the female's quite large, and these are pictures that we're looking at are preserved specimens, so they're kind of wrinkly and deflated. But the female's really large. A male, when he finds that female, he bites on and becomes sort of like a little parasite. He eventually will merge with her circulatory system. So he mates with that female for life. He's attached to her. He's feeding off of her blood and just providing a constant source of sperm so that she can produce eggs to reproduce. The male of some of our anglerfish are some of the largest known sexually mature vertebrates that talk about a parasitic relationship. Next is body size. Generally speaking, due to this lack of nutrients, body sizes tend to be smaller. However, because of the cold, metabolisms are slower and things can live longer. And because they're able to live longer, sometimes that means they grow bigger. And we see this actually a lot in more of the invertebrates. It's still a rare phenomenon, but it's out there, where they get much larger than their shallow-bodied counterparts. We get things like the giant isopod. Think your roly-polies or the pill bugs in your yard at home, or this one can grow up to 3 feet long. There's giant amphipods. These are little freshwater organisms that are like 1/2 centimeter long. These can be like 1 foot long down there. Giant squids, so the squid we dissected in class, normal size. Those were, I don't know, 1 foot long when you counted their tentacles. Giant squid are like 20 feet long. They get a lot bigger, they live in the deep. Their anatomy also tends to be simpler and less complex. Again, especially with the invertebrates. Generally, we see an inverse relationship. As ocean depth increases, as you go deeper, bodies become simpler. So we can see here this octopus, its legs aren't stretched out, they're more connected. This little sea cucumber. Some of these sea lilies, very basic structures. And their structures, excuse me if I go back, have to be able to help hold them up above the ooze, because that ocean floor, all that dead marine snow that's come down, has basically just made a pile of muck and soft decaying stickiness. So you gotta be able to stand up and not get sucked into that sediment. Our next adaptation is going to be bioluminescence. This adaptation is quite widespread. It's estimated that as many as 70% of our deep sea organisms have some sort of ability to produce light. Here we have a couple of examples. This is a fish called the dragonfish, producing some blue light, and here is a comb jelly that can produce a red light. All right, we talked about nutrient sources. One of the major nutrient sources that creates its own little unique microhabitat is going to be a whale fall. So this is when a whale dies and sinks down to the bottom of the ocean. When a whale dies, typically we hope this is due to natural causes, happening before people were whaling for long periods of time. One of the unforeseen effects of whaling is also the lack then of these whale falls. If we kill a whale and take it out of the ocean, it's not there to fall down to the bottom to lead to these new communities. This is a place where dead whale comes to rest, massive concentration of nutrients. And these whale falls, again, because it's cold down there, can sometimes last for decades, and scientists have been able to document them. There's sort of stages of development and different organisms that you can see feeding on them. Another unique community that we can find is going to be surrounding hydrothermal vents. That's because hydrothermal vents are one of the few sources of true primary productivity. There are some chemosynthetic bacteria that are able to consume the chemicals coming out of these vents. These vents are small cracks in the Earth's crust where parts of the mantle are coming up. and they act as the base of a food pyramid. Instead of depending on all the decay sinking down, now we have something producing food at the bottom of the ocean. Our hydrothermal vents tend to be found along the edges of our continental plates. So we've got lots of them in the Pacific, and again, lots down the mid-Atlantic ridge where the ocean is spreading. And so here's a picture. These are all a bunch of tube worms. This vent, all that what looks like black is all the chemicals coming up out. Opposite of a hydrothermal vent. Hydrothermal vents, lots of heat. This water is very, very hot. There are also then cold seeps. It's not that they're totally frigid. It's already 2 degrees Celsius down there. It's already pretty cold. It's just that they're colder than those super incredibly hot hydrothermal vents. These are areas where hydrocarbons, think oil, that oil that's down in our crust sometimes naturally cracks out. Things like methane and other sulfide-rich compounds are able to seep up from cracks in the crust. Down here, what looks like a little lake, this is actually a pool of methane surrounded by organisms. Here we've got some sort of what looks kind of like an eel that swim around. Again, we're going to have primary productivity. There are bacteria down here doing chemosynthesis. When it comes to cold seeps, they generally tend to be found around fault lines, not as prevalent as hydrothermal vents. There are, though, quite a few in the Gulf of Mexico. Gulf of Mexico has a unique geology. It's very oil rich. We tend to have lots of oil drilling. Because of all those oil rich deposits, we also have these methane seeps and these hydrocarbons coming out. Another unique thing about, so our Gulf of Mexico, some of its deep sea life, we've got anemones, we have gorgonians, which are a special type of coral and basket stars. This wasn't known about until within the last decade that we discovered these deep sea corals in the Gulf of Mexico, or last decade, decade and a half. These unique deep sea corals that don't need sunlight, that don't go through photosynthesis. They don't have that symbiotic relationship like we tend to think of with most coral reefs that we find in the tropical area. This unique habitat, it has been documented as has been very impacted by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which happened 10 years ago. People tend to associate oil pollution with on the surface. So here are some surface pictures, or when it hits the coastline, destroying saltgrass communities and mangrove forests and mucking up the beach and killing all the seagrass. And that does happen. Oil spills are terrible things in aquatic environments, but it's not just the surface habitats that are impacted. When there's an oil spill, everything gets impacted. With the Deepwater Horizon, one of the things they used were some dispersants which spread it out and actually encouraged it to sink. And they've been able to document that some of these very unique deep sea corals have all been killed and damaged within a 7-mile radius of where the Deep Sea Horizon oil spill happened. So with oil spills, the best thing for them is prevention. Even cleaning them up is costly and difficult. Using things like dispersants have side effects. There also seem to be some impact to the marine life from the chemical used to clean it up. Burning it just creates that more carbon dioxide for climate change. With oil, well, we really need to be using less of it and putting in more protections so that this pollution and spills happen less. And